I was just thinking about Xenoblade, because I was listening to the Xenogears soundtrack, as you do, because I have brain rot. And I was just thinking about why Xenoblade has always stuck around for me so effervescently so. What was it that made Xenoblade so special, you know? That didn't necessarily make it stand out, but just something that made me appreciate it all the more when I never really thought about this concept before, and I think that is the ever-prevailing sense of mystery and wonder that the series has always managed to maintain because they don't over-explain things. And this may sound simple on the surface, but let's peel back the veil and examine this concept, because I think a lot of stories and a lot of games mess up on this key singular issue, where they feel this, like, primal need somewhere deep within to explain every little detail and to basically explain the magic away. And some games and some stories can manage to do that and retain that air of mystique that drew you in to begin with, but Xenoblade elects to go a different route. The Monado, the Conduit / Zohar, the true origins of Mobius, and the Black Fog. We have some little inklings of answers, but we don't have anything concrete. We don't have, okay, A, B, C, D, and E, and then you get the Conduit. We don't really have that. And instead, they've elected to wrap up those storylines and allow us to move on, and to move on to newer narratives and to newer story structures and arcs, without feeling the need to explain to us the exact origins of, say, the Conduit / Zohar, or how it was capable of allowing people to manifest Monados and Aegis swords and all that stuff. And some people will view that as a critique, that it's an unexplained answer that has just been kind of forgotten, and that the story isn't complete until we get an answer to that. And I get that sentiment because it's truly exciting and interesting, and you want to find these answers, right? But I think one of the most brilliant joys of life sometimes is that pursuit of trying to know but never truly knowing. That climb up the perpetual hill that just never seems to allow you to reach its peak. And when it concerns the Monado from Xenoblade 1, or the Conduit / Zohar of Xenoblade 2, like Xenoblade 2 and 1 give you a lot of answers as to how that world works. But the highest stuff, the tippity top of the verse essentially, how it all functions, they never really explain that part. Or if they do, they don't go beneath the surface. And that's not a critique in my opinion, that is one of the biggest compliments that I can levy to Xenoblade, because they nail this in my opinion. Because there's something magical about Xenoblade's world, something mysterious and unique, with the Monados, the Aegis swords, the Conduit, humanity's entire timeline and course of history changing within a fraction of a moment when someone out in the world happened to stumble upon this magical item, and everything from that moment on changed. It's an incredibly interesting what if, and injects Xenoblade with a bunch of wonder and mystery and magic. And if you want to know what I mean, and maybe this is just a me thing and I can completely understand if it is, look at the cover of Xenoblade 1, 2, and 3. When you see the Monada, when you see Pyra and Rex looking out to the World Tree, or when you see the Mechonis sword and Uriah, that invokes this sense of scale and epicness and grandeur to it all, but also this kind of humble mystique. It's the world, but these magical components and these kind of flights of fancy and fantasy are allowed to exist. And the story is not necessarily about where these things come from, per se. Like, yeah, Sansa and Mayneth, but the Monados really are able to manifest because of the Conduit. We don't get the answers to where they come from. All we get is that the Conduit pretty much exits stage left at the end of Xenoblade 2. And the story itself concerns more so not the origins of the Conduit, but just how, if humanity was introduced to this endless spring of imagination and power and possibility, what would humanity do with it? Well, perhaps one person would dream a little bit too loftily and desire to become a god, and in that pursuit, make use of humanity's newfound resource for his own selfish ends, wrapped in a veil and excuse of it being unselfish, or selfless, willing to cleave the world in twain, and allow whatever repercussions that would result in to prosper and propagate. And then, how would these worlds react to all of this? Stuck in seemingly endless cycles of death and rebirth, trapped in a madman's game, all because of a mystical element and relic that decided to enter the narrative, the story of humanity. The story itself doesn't concern that relic specifically, and in fact, there's very little screen time to the actual main doodad of the series. The Zohar/Conduit, it's only in a few scenes. Minutes upon the hundreds of hours that this series tells you, or allows you to experience. Truly think about that. The most important lore piece of memorabilia in the entire verse, the Conduit, is only really shown in a couple of scenes at the end of the game, and collectively for maybe, I want to say, a couple minutes, like 2 or 3, and I think that's even generous. Because the story itself wants to utilize that magic, that mystique, but focus more so on telling humanity's narrative about interacting with these magical gifts. Thrust into a world where magic and mystique now suddenly are commonplace, how does humanity react to that? Xenoblade is an extremely human narrative, and I've talked about before how one of my favorite aspects of it is you have this grand mythic world around you with the Bionis and the Mechonis, or the Cloud Sea, but the story going on is extremely down to earth and human in nature. Sorry, I just absolutely housed a bagel right now. So where were we? Oh yes. I think a large part of Xenoblade's charm is its ability to contrast these grandiose elements, these larger-than-life scales to the world, right? Swords that can give you visions of the future, or bestow upon you your wildest wish and seemingly make fantasy into reality, all while juxtaposed against extremely real, down-to-earth human stories and conflicts. And I think because Xenoblade manages to focus on these human elements, it allows the world to remain magical and to feel mysterious and to feel cool. So that at the end of the game, or near the end of the game, it doesn't feel like a completely different experience from where you were to begin with. In certain elements, sure, but the world is able to still retain some semblance of mysticism and mystique. And that's really important. How many times have you gotten to the end of a game and seemingly all the magic was explained out of it? That a lore that the world once had became kind of, not mundane, just secondhand maybe? And I think there's a real consequence to over-explaining certain concepts in video games, all on the altar of making sure you don't have any plot holes or filling in every single gap in a narrative. A good story does not need to have every single question explained and answered. It's okay to still have questions, because that's what life is all about. It's just mostly, in my opinion, a matter of picking and choosing what questions you want to have answered and what should be allowed to remain as questions. And funnily enough, this is one of the unintended consequences of Xenoblade X just not getting a follow-up game since its release. That world of Mira is still so full and chock-full of mystery and intrigue, because we have never even gotten the follow-up game to explain it yet. But it allows Mira to keep this sense of mystique, there's something different about this world. One of the final lines of Xenoblade X, and that holds true. Every time you go back to Xenoblade X, you still feel like you're being lost in this fantasy sci-fi world, and that's the same case with Xenoblade 1, 2, and 3, because they don't feel the need to explain away every single question. So when you revisit those games, or you look back and think upon them again, they still have that sense of magic and wonder that you had when you first started. At least they do for me. Maybe it's different for you, and that's entirely fine. But this is just how I feel. And I think, funnily enough, that's one of the reasons I can always come back and play these games again. They're extremely long games that don't have branching narratives or anything like that. Well, unless you like the side quests in Xenoblade 1 or X. But for like the main story, it's what it is. And I've played Xenoblade 2 about 4 or 5 times. And every time, the world of Allrest still grips me tight and refuses to let go. The world is still full of wonder and magic. And a lot of it was explained in Xenoblade 2, a lot of it. The Conduit wasn't. We have inklings and vague descriptions about the origins of the Aegis's power, but we don't have full 100% complete answers. And that's a cool thing, in my opinion. I don't view it as a problem or a critique, I view that as a massive positive, because these games still have their magic. It never faded away. It's pretty cool in my opinion. Pretty dang cool. And with that, I think I'll call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure for making the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. And it really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. And leave a comment down below with what game, it doesn't have to be Xenoblade, but it could be Xenoblade for you. What game had that sense of magic to it and still has it? Or if you want to talk about an example of what I was talking about before, about a game where you had this sense of magic and wonder going into it, but by the end they over-explain everything, let me know about that as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts and hear your opinions and to hear your stories. So stay safe, have a great day, go play some video games if you can, and as always, I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again.